Thank you, Jackie, and good day, colleagues, and thank you for coming, and also for the previous speakers for your very interesting and illuminating presentations. So this is the CSIR conference, and the overall focus is industrialization. So it's important for the CSIR to interact with stakeholders like you that are here and the previous speakers, because it forms part of the national effort for improved cybersecurity, and it's also part of the South African, the CSIR's mandate to do research and development, innovation in support of developing science, but having impact, working with industry. So one of the questions that I ask myself is how cyber resilient is South Africa? So some of the previous speakers have already talked about resilience. And resilience, I think, one could see in the ability to recover from attacks when they happen. Obviously, firstly, we want to not have attacks, but this is one domain where it seems that whatever we do, there will be new attack vectors and new technologies and vulnerabilities, so we will be attacked. And the best then that we can hope for is to be able to recover. So there's four kind of quadrants of being ready: low risk, high risk versus low resilience, high resilience. So hopefully we're not in a fool's paradise domain where we don't know what happened and we're also not ready to recover from it. We may be vulnerable. The risks certainly seem to increase, and maybe we don't have higher resilience everywhere. We may also be complacent, saying we have not been attacked. And I think despite all the global hype about cybersecurity, many of us have not had a personal attack. We may have had some viruses, we may have read news stories, but many of us have not had a serious attack. And that may make us complacent, that it won't happen to us, it won't happen to me. Hopefully we are not there. The ideal situation, I think, for any country is to have managed resilience, to be able to understand, to engage with the threats, to understand what can happen, to be prepared as far as possible, to respond or detect and respond when something happens to you, and eventually to recover. So where is South Africa at the moment? So I'm taking the easy way out and saying we're probably somewhere in the middle, with some people being better prepared and others still hoping for the best. Where do we want to be? We want to have a country that's really able to be resilient, even in even in the face of high levels of attacks. And it may happen. During the World Cup in 2010, we said, let's not have a cyber attack during the World Cup. Unfortunately, there wasn't a big one. There was a lot of smaller crime incidents. But what will really happen if we have an attack on South Africa that disables our mobile devices, or take Jackie's money, or things like that? We will suddenly really become serious about it. So that's just the kind of philosophical part. Cybersecurity research and innovation includes, obviously, firstly, to understand the threats. And that in itself is not an easy task, but we need to know what we're up against. And then, in order to respond, you need technical expertise. You need security standards. Some mechanism, and Kiru talked a lot about that will say this is a kind of minimum level that you should implement, knowing that it might not be enough, but at least what you know you should be doing. My favorite one is the common advice that you shouldn't click when it says click here in the email that you don't know, but how many of us actually click and hope for the best, hope for getting a free phone or something like that? I think all of us have done that, and it's bad advice to do that, but still. So some standards, I think, would help us to get everybody at least to the bottom level. integrated security solutions, we tend to be overrun by loose solutions from different commercial providers. And we buy a new cell phone and there's some new things. So one of the challenges we have is to see the big picture and how the dots connect. Also the processes to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover if all else fails. We need to have some recourse and understanding. And our other favorite topic is what happens to Joe citizen that's been subjected to a cyber attack? Where does he go? If he goes to the average police station, at the moment he won't be helped because they don't know how. The Cybersecurity Hub is taking us in that direction. But just imagine if they had a public portal where anybody can complain about crime incidents. And next month I sit with, let's say, 100,000 incidents. We're not able to cope with that. So research and innovation includes helping us to understand what we need to work against and then finding solutions. So my role is to brag a bit about what the CSIR has done, but I'm doing this with a lot of humility because we're also invited the industry here to tell us where are the gaps, what do we actually need to focus on, and that's where we want to end. So we have a track record of working with government and industry. We've written many policies and strategies. We were involved with the Department of Communications in the early days of the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework, for example. We enable smart buying solutions, often issue with defense and government, where the vendors line up with their solutions and how do you decide? Build capacity and infrastructure. I'll tell a bit more about what we have for research and innovation. Develop some tools and technologies, share threat intelligence, and respond to cyber attacks. So those are some of the things that we have done. So we had to ask ourselves, where will we focus? And we cannot really narrow it down because the domain is so big. But we came up with these 7 focus areas. And there's not time to spend a lot of time on all of them. I'll just run through. It's more for information. This is our playing field. Securing ICT systems is, in a sense, one word or 3 words for a big domain, because all of us have systems, information systems, email systems, business intelligence systems. Any ICT thing that the CSIR works with need to be considered in terms of, is it secure? So that involves understanding the threats, employing the technologies, testing vulnerabilities, etc. Combating cybercrime is one of those domains that may influence us individually a bit more. And that's one of the big challenges for South Africa. What do we do if somebody has been the victim of cybercrime? And we've had some interesting high-level incidences like the famous Standard Bank event. And South Africa has been able to investigate, go to Japan, and get some results out of that. But generally, we have a long way to go in having a capability to do proper forensics, proper investigation, proper prosecution of people using the legislation. Cyber warfare is the military side that Jackie also mentioned. That's actually where the CSIR cybersecurity capability started, because the military was the first to identify information warfare as a strategic capability, even before a lot of the commercial stuff came to play. So that's the longest capability, and cyber warfare has a defensive and offensive parts, and the offensive part we clearly don't talk about, so forget what I said, because it's illegal except for our defense force who has a mandate to do it if necessary. But for most of us, we cannot commit cyber warfare because it will be seen as cyber crime. Identity management is one of those things that's pervasive. In most parts of the ICT world, we need to identify who's interacting, are they allowed to interact, what are they allowed to do using the ICT systems. So we're doing some work on the biometric side, smart cards, and the related things, working on national identity system, because identity is a fundamental thing. You may have heard the story of who's at the other end of the internet, is the dog or a human. We often just don't know, and we hope for the best. And so identity management has a huge role to play in helping us clarify that part, which would actually enable us to do some liability in the end if we actually know who's on the other end and we can find that person in case of crime. Awareness and human capacity development. Kiru talked about the awareness side. We've developed some tools for use with universities to make it a bit playful, but nationally, I'm not sure you mentioned October as the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Internationally, actually, this is done. So we're growing our ability to put South Africa on the map in the equal way of raising awareness at fundamental level. Because the worst is if you didn't know the best things you need to do. Human capacity development is not a fundamental mandate for the CSIR, but especially in this domain, it's kind of enabling and part of what we need to do because, and Paul mentioned that, there's just a shortage of cybersecurity professionals, both at the high-tech level and at the operational level. And so some things we do in this domain is work on curriculums with universities, share some information, collaborative research so that masters and PhDs at least can have access to some of our tools and research infrastructure, but also working with industry and identifying what the real problems are. Finally, embedded security is a part where the cyber world and the physical world comes together. Internet of Things security. This is for us an emerging domain, but if you think of Industry 4.0 and the increasing dependence of whole businesses on working in the ICT world, where security is fundamental. If you don't have security, things fall flat. So there's just a list of some of our main partners. Obviously, we've worked with defense and state security on some of the solutions. Kiru mentioned the National Cybersecurity Hub. We're really proud of our involvement there, and the Hub is a key stakeholder for CSIR in working on what's happening nationally, the tools we need, but spreading what needs to be done in industry. Department of Science and Technology is obviously a key stakeholder in terms of funding, and they've funded some of our master's and PhD programs, including in the biometrics and smart card world. We work with the police. We have done some investigations and forensic analysis with and for them. Currently, we are working with them in understanding exactly what the National Cybercrime Center unit needs to be and how to implement that, because that's one of the strategic capabilities we need for the country. And then other sectors like National Identity System with Home Affairs, biometrics for Home Affairs and the Payments Association, working on a health information exchange, security architecture with the Department of Health as a backbone for the intended future national health insurance. We've been collaborating on this new cybersecurity legislation with Justice, and on e-commerce policy and devices we worked with the Financial Services Board and Payments Association. So some of the practical things we have in place: the CSIR for the South African National Research and Education Network, which Kiru also mentioned. The blue lines on the map are the high-speed links between research education institutions in South Africa, which CSIR managed the rollout of, and now CSIR is manning the CSIR for this network in terms of identifying incidents and responding sharing awareness in the academic and research community. We have been involved in designing, implementing, validating verification of security operations centers. It's basically a center and organization that watches over the whole ICT part, that knows what's happening, that can identify threats and coordinate responses. Then we have some research infrastructure that supports research and innovation across the NIST cybersecurity framework. In other words, the part where you identify the threats, you protect against them, you detect when you are attacked, you respond against the attack, and you recover once you have been attacked and you suffer the consequences. So in order to do that, we've developed early warning detection technology. What makes this one unique is that it looks not just at the current attack, but over time, the indicators that somebody is already messing in your network until there's maybe an intrusion at a later point. And globally, it's been stated by some of the statistics that it sometimes takes a year from the first time somebody entered your network and started playing around to when you really detect it, because initially they don't want to be detected. They want to feel you out until they're ready to attack. The Network Emulation and Simulation Laboratory was co-funded by Department of Science and Technology. It gives us the capability to simulate networks, to emulate attacks, to see how the network plays out against the attacks, using real attack information. You can also attach physical devices to this laboratory so that it becomes a cyber-physical kind of test environment. It can also be accessed through the internet, so it's a tool that students can also use for conducting research. The national platform has a capability of linking all sorts of things. I'm not going to go into detail there. Find vulnerabilities on the internet through Cyber Protect. That's the next one. We're now entering this age of the personal protection of personal information, and the act being enacted already, with the regulations still being published. So soon there will be a requirement to protect personal information in your possession and to make sure that it's not either hacked or used for wrong purposes. So Cyber Protect is one way to identify those vulnerabilities. It provides a visualization where you can see how many devices, for example, in your organization are vulnerable. You can also identify when the country attacks may come from or vulnerable data might be lying. And it will look at things like social security numbers or contact information, personal information that you don't always want to be spread on the internet. So it will tell you how much of that can actually be easily found through the internet, and which means that you need to improve your protection. It's also a mobile verification center where you can upload new apps and test them for vulnerabilities. Then the cybercrime combating platform looks at the dark web that Paul also talked about. Look for vulnerabilities, data collection, harvesting and scraping, understanding where the crimes might come from and sharing that information. And finally, we're working on this idea of a center, cybersecurity center for innovation in South Africa. Because essentially, innovation happens as a response to threat, and it includes the role of government entities like Cybersecurity Hub and legislation. It includes industry, who owns a lot of the infrastructure, who identifies a lot of the problems. It includes higher education, who's supposed to train the right people and release them for work. So the centers of innovation idea is firstly to promote collaboration. And this needs to happen in various centers. At the moment, it's been piloted here in Pretoria and in Cape Town. But it's something we want to roll out broader so that even municipalities and universities and schools can have this kind of collaboration to understand the threats understand what solutions are available, and stimulate innovation so that innovation can happen on real-world problems. So my request to industry and everybody is, let's collaborate to make South Africa safer, so that we can support industry and national cybersecurity, better resilience, better implementable policies, can build better capacity, develop better tools, share better threat intelligence, and respond to attacks in a better way. And finally, as an introduction to the panel, we have these three questions. Is the South African industry prepared for threats in cyberspace? And we've already heard some good inputs from Vodacom and Standard Bank. So clearly a lot is being done. So what about the rest of the industry? And they are kind of at the key point, finances and telcos. What about the rest of the industry? Is it prepared? What's lacking? In other words, if we had to engage in a national effort to close the gap, what do we need to do? What homegrown solutions do we need to develop? And then from a CSR perspective, what research, development, and innovation is needed beyond solutions? Because there are many solutions, and many vendors will tell you many stories. So we don't want to just replace what's there. So what do we need to do beyond what's there, and what we need to already have and implement? So finally, and you'll also have access to the presentation there. In terms of our focus areas, we have some colleagues who specialize in certain areas, and I indicated some of the names there with a letter behind their name indicating for which area you can contact them. Thank you.